Good morning, everyone. So I think it's about to start the session on Cubesats and LEOs. It'll go from 10:30 to 12. And our first speaker is Professor Russell Boyce. Russell is the director of the UNSW Canberra Space. It's the largest and leading space mission research and education team. He also holds the position of chair of Intelligent Space Systems, and he played a significant role in the establishment of the Australian Space Agency and a fellow of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. Welcome, Russell.
So what I want to do today, keeping with the title of the talk that I'm going to present to you, Defence's Space Mission, Research and Education Capability at the Australian Defence Force Academy, UNSW Canberra Space. I'm going to give you some insights into what it is that we do and insights into why we do it and what the relevance is for the new Defence Space Strategy that was released yesterday, and in turn for the purposes of Defence Space Command. So, as I said, I'm going to give you some insights into what we do and the implications for the space strategy. I was thrilled that the space strategy was in PDF form that I could steal off the web yesterday and immediately start doing screenshotting. So you'll find some of the content of the space strategy in this talk. And this is one of the screenshots that I took. It's a very, very handy layered view of the space domain, the areas of space domain awareness activity that Space Command is going to be interested in. The reason I put up this is to show you the areas of expertise that UNSW Canberra Space has. These are the areas that we play in. We do ground-based space surveillance. We do a lot of work in LEO for both Earth imaging, in-orbit intelligence. Well, it says Cubesats there. We do all of this on Cubesats at the moment. We also do a healthy amount of space weather, space environment modelling, and we build that into our space domain awareness capabilities. Before I get to that though, I want to identify to you three critical areas of need which Defence Space Command must attend to in the years to come. And the first is around the highly skilled workforce that is needed. I believe there's about 80 people in Defence Space Command at the moment. It needs to grow to a few thousand in the coming 1 or 2 decades. There is an enormous skills shortage in space in Australia. What we're seeing in the craziness and chaos of the Australian space sector right now is a lot of poaching going on. There's not enough good people to go around at the moment, let alone grow for the future. So how are we going to do that, and what skills are they going to have? There's a lot of work that's been done in various quarters, various pieces of analysis that suggest that the future highly skilled workforce needs skills in the area of technology, particularly automation and artificial intelligence. That's the technology side though. At least as important are the soft skills, the social and emotional skills which lead to leadership outcomes, lead to teamwork, and they need the thinking skills, the higher cognitive skills, that the future activities that an organisation such as Defence Space Command is going to need to depend upon. As we proceed into the future, tackling both defence and non-defence, tackling the challenges that are coming at us, we need to build a high technology skills-based economy and capability. So the take home from this, we need to be building all of those skills, the technology skills, the soft skills, the cognitive skills, to be able to do that. Turns out that space is such a complex domain, not a discipline, that brings together all of the disciplines and touches pretty much everything that we do terrestrially. It is the perfect domain, the perfect environment in which to develop all of those skills. In Australia at the moment, there is a lot of excitement around space hardware development. In my opinion, and in the opinion of many others, the amount of space hardware activity in the future is going to be niche, it's going to be boutique in Australia. We're not going to be developing that many satellites and have that many people with hands-on skills needed to develop those satellites. Globally it's going to be in the tens of thousands locally it cannot be that much. It's going to be boutique. Nevertheless, it is going to be something. We do need people with those skills. Most of the workforce is going to be needed in the downstream applications, the analytics, the conversion of data derived through space systems turned into information that is actionable and can create outcomes on the ground. The very best thing, in my personal opinion, about the space domain and all the activities and complexities that go into it, and the technologies involved and the soft skills involved, and the thinking around issues such as not just science and engineering, but also the legalities, the ethics behind it all. It's the perfect environment in which to create the leadership skills that are needed for the future. And not just amongst the grown-ups in the room, but going all the way back into school and inspiring kids to pursue STEM. Well, I actually personally believe kids don't need any inspiring when it comes to space. They are already inspired, they are super inspired, and they care a lot about the world. We can use space, build upon that inspiration, and create the future thinkers and leaders. So those slides that I've just presented, let's call that the need for a highly skilled future thinking and leading workforce, and Defence Space Command is needing to develop that. A second need is around the area of the technology, and in particular what the term that is typically bandied around, disruptive innovation. Disruptive innovation has a particular meaning. Australia is a new entrant into the space game. The companies and organisations and agencies in Australia who are getting into space are new entrants. If we set about trying to take on the rest of the world in what Harvard would call sustaining innovation, slow incremental advances on technology, and if we try to take on the incumbents, we're just going to get a hider. It doesn't work. The only way, historically, if you look at the entire history of commerce, of industry, is if you pursue disruptive innovation. That's the only way that new entrants into a particular market area can take on and actually beat the incumbents. I recommend that you access that article that I wrote, and again I can't focus on it, but it's in, there was an innovation publication last year called Australia's Nobel Laureates, of which I'm not one, and never will be, but it takes the work of Harvard as applied to disruptive innovation and gives some thought into how that applies to the Australian space sector. But this is an area of need. We need to be developing technology innovations and business model innovations that are disruptive and are not simply sustaining, or we won't win. The other thing that I want to get across, the other critical need, is recognition of the fact that space is hard. Those two images there are from my former lifetime. I spent 25 years in hypersonics. The final career posting, if you like, I had the role of DSTO Chair for Hypersonics at the University of Queensland, and I led a large team to conduct a scramjet experiment, flight experiment, launched on a rocket high above the Arctic Circle in Norway, and it went horribly wrong. Not the scramjet, the Australian thing was beautiful and it behaved perfectly on the day, but the rocket provided by international partners shredded itself on the launch rail. Launch is one of the high-risk parts of getting into space, of developing and operating a space system. This chart from the National Reconnaissance Office quite some years ago now, but still relevant today, demonstrates where the risk where it lies in the development of a space system, all the way from authority to proceed at the start through to the end of the whole life cycle. It peaks at launch, but there's a lot of risk the whole way through. And it is hard to get this right. And we have experienced in my team with one of the missions, I'll show it to you soon, called M1 for Air Force. It failed. We never spoke to it when it got to orbit. And that taught us an enormous amount about space. So Australia needs technical expertise to be able to understand that space is hard and understand what that means, in order to provide mission assurance. And what I think of as mission assurance as being choosing to do the right missions, not the wrong ones, and having chosen the right missions, do them the right way. So those three things, one more slide. The fact that mission assurance is needed in Australia was recognised by last year's parliamentary inquiry in the form of recommendation 6. So 3 critical needs, in the opinion of UNSW Canberra Space, that Defence Space Command needs to attend to. Attracting and training the highly skilled workforce, attending to disruptive innovation, not just same old, and repeating the mistakes of the past, or trying to take on the incumbents who've been doing it for a long time, and mission assurance. So UNSW Canberra Space at the Australian Defence Force Academy literally exists to try to meet those 3 needs. That's a shot of our team a small number of years ago, and that's what we consider to be the why. That's why we exist, our vision, if you like. Empowering people with space for a bold and better future, and what we mean by that can take many, many forms. It involves training that future skilled workforce through immersive space education, and the immersive word is important. It involves doing complex, push-the-boat-out, audacious space missions, pushing ahead of industry who shouldn't be taking certain risks, and then offering to industry the IP and technologies that are developed and allow them to sweep that up behind us and eventually get it into capability. It also means developing and providing trusted expert advice to support developments in Australia. So how are we going about doing this? First of all, we have set up an environment in which we do space missions, and as a result of that, we train people, we create highly skilled people. And as you'll see later in this talk, many of our team have gone out into and across the Australian and to a smaller extent international space sector and are having enormous impact because of the experiences and skills that they've developed. We do disruptive space research and development across a number of areas, but with particular focus on the science and technology of space domain awareness and the application of artificial intelligence to space systems. We take on challenging space missions. Those 2 little satellites, which you've probably seen to death now in this image and many other images around the place, the M2 mission is one of the most complex, challenging Cubesat missions that's ever been attempted by anybody, ever. The fact that the team had a near-death experience, I would say, in the process of trying to get him to the launch pad, and succeeded, and it's in orbit and it's working. The know-how, the ability to take on the hard things again and again, and to translate lessons learned into the growing expertise of the likes of Defence Space Command is really important. We are tackling the provision of immersive space education, where we want the professional engineers coming to us, we want the students engaged with us to be starting to get their hands dirty in the development of space missions and in the operation of space missions. And again, we are in some very explicit ways providing trusted expertise for mission assurance, and I'll give you a glimpse into what that means pretty soon. So the particular what? David Lingard from DST will talk about Buccaneer main mission in this session. This was Buccaneer risk mitigation mission, which was a joint program between my team and DSTG. That launched in 2017 and was a very, very successful joint project and successful mission. We procured the bus for that, and the process of procuring the bus taught us that procuring buses from commercial vendors out there around the world, at least at that stage, was not necessarily the wisest thing to do. Plenty of problems that needed to be re-engineered and fixed. So that then led us, in a program that we started with Air Force, the MSeries, to go completely in-house. I'll describe what happened then. Along the way though, we started working with other partners around the world. So we did phase A and into phase B of a quantum communications demonstration mission, which at some point we hope to be able to fly. We're doing some precursor technology building blocks on M2 at the moment towards that. We also developed a very, very interesting sensor capability and a mission concept for an atmospheric methane detection system from Cubesats. We did that with Rail Space from the UK. But then came the MSeries. That was M1, mostly in-house technologies, got it to orbit, never spoke to it again. That was, in one sense, a disaster, but as many of you would know Macca, former Air Marshal Warren MacDonald, he was our sponsor, our patron for this, and he said to me at Avalon after we'd spent some months trying to contact the thing, Russ, this is great, this is fantastic. You're going to have failures, better to have them early and learn from them. And so that's what we did. And the thing that we learned as we did a real deep dive into everything that we had done, we learned not what was the reason for the failure, although there were a couple of smoking guns. We learned that we hadn't tested enough. We weren't rigorous enough. We were kiddies in the sandpit, and we needed to start growing up. And so we set about trying to understand what does it mean to grow up and to step out of the sandpit and at least become adolescents, hoping to mature into adults one day. One of the things that we did was invest in invest in a very, very significant ground station capability, and it's hosted by our partners Singular Space out near Yass. And we slipped in an extra mission. Thank you to Air Force for providing some extra cash for that. M2 Pathfinder. M2 Pathfinder was a three-unit CubeSat launched by Rocket Lab for us in the middle of 2020, and it had all of the in-house subsystems that were going to be needed on the M2 mission. And it was completely successful, and we're still operating it. Completely reconfigurable, so one of the routine things that we do as we develop new software for M2 as well as for Pathfinder, we upload it to this satellite and we test it out. And then came M2. So M2 has this long, long list of technology demonstrations, science demonstrations. It is a very, very complex mission. It's two 6U CubeSats launched as a 12-unit block, again with Rocket Lab, March last year. When we had done the commissioning of the whole system as a 12-unit block, we gently separated the two halves from each other, and we've been flying them in formation ever since. So they follow each other around the world, and we're able to use low Earth orbit aerodynamic forces to control that. My colleague Brenton is going to be talking a bit more about that after me. We've got onboard software-defined radios. We've got 4 different optical imaging systems ranging from event-based sensing to 5-metre ground resolution telescope to in-house star tracker to what we call the selfie cam. We've got space domain awareness experiments and technology demonstrations happening, and we've got onboard artificial intelligence, which we have demonstrated. We're one of the first organisations in the world to have done in-orbit artificial intelligence, both inferencing and retraining of a model, and we'll be applying that this year to processing the imagery that we get from the various optical systems, and eventually to time series anomaly analysis of what comes in through the software-defined radios. We have our own clean room, and we use the facilities on Mount Stromlo for testing spacecraft. There's a shot of one of the two M2 halves just before doing TVAC testing on Mount Stromlo. And this is the moment at which we separated the two from each other. So each of the two halves had their own selfie cam looking back towards the other, and we were able to capture that moment when we separated the two halves from each other. The separation was something we were very nervous about. We thought it would go well, but we had a lot of antenna deployed and we didn't want to get things tangled up, and they didn't. And then since then, we've been doing the following. This is the separation distance between the two spacecraft. Since we separated back in September last year until pretty much 2 days ago. There's some crazy looking stuff going on there. Let me quickly step you through what we did. We separated and we allowed, up until that arrow, we allowed the two with the force imparted by the springs to just separate at their own rate. And then we deployed solar panels, and we thought we had fully deployed them and that would arrest the separation and we would basically park them. Didn't happen, but we kept separating. And we tried to stop and scratch our heads and work out what was going on, and we kept separating a bit faster, and finally we realised that we hadn't fully deployed the solar panels. So we tried again to deploy the solar panels and were able to successfully do that this time. That brought the two spacecraft into a parked situation about 140 kilometres apart from each other, following each other around the globe. And then when we were ready, not very long after that, we did an attitude change of one of them to maximum drag, attitude change of the other to minimum drag, so that we could start to bring them back together again. And we started that downhill slope at that point, and very, very quickly the sun decided it was going to get involved as well, and a major solar flare happened, which raised the density of the atmosphere at that point by a factor of 5. And these two satellites went whooshka. And before we knew it, because at that moment we took our eyes off the ball, and they passed each other. They went screaming past each other and got out to 170 kilometres on the wrong side before we finally brought them under control. We brought them under control by changing their attitudes again. We did some mucking around, and then we started another manoeuvre to bring them back together again. At that point, and of course Murphy, also known as the sun, kicked in again. It's just phenomenal. And so we just managed to get the brakes on and pulled them up within 1 kilometre of each other not too long ago. The fact that this graph suggests that they passed each other again, that didn't actually happen. Part of the message from this, if you take the two-dot line element orbital information from the space catalogue for spacecraft and think that it is truth, it's not always truth. We've been playing now for the last couple of weeks preparing for the next SATCOM event, which some of the people in the room would be aware of. I won't go into that. The thing I want you to understand from this is everybody typically just puts up a satellite and they play with it, and they're not too fussed about what it's doing, where it is. When you've got two, when you're working in tandem, you start to realise just how complex things are in orbit and how strong the effects of the space environment can be. So the looming warrior of death is walking down the steps towards me. I will accelerate Vince. In my opinion, we've played the biggest single role in contributing to the growth of the space sector of any other organisation in Australia. We've produced over 1/3 of all Australian homegrown satellites in orbit, the yellow ones. There's about 30 Australian organisations in our mission supply chain. We've created 3 spin-off companies in the last 3 years, and they're all turning into the great successes. And I think the count now is 23 highly skilled people have gone out into the sector. They're in agencies, they're in government, they're in industry, they're in other universities, and they're having a great impact. I mentioned mission assurance. Vince, let me dwell on this for just a moment. This is the Australian National Concurrent Design Facility, which we operate on campus at ADFA. It's a place where, with the right software tools, which we were given by the French Space Agency, and with the right skills in the room and the right conductor of the orchestra, we bring together the different flavours of engineering needed to analyse a concept, an architecture for a mission. You bring them together with the customer, and over about 10 days, you very, very rapidly iterate many times the design, the concept, and you come out within about 10 to 20% uncertainty, technical feasibility, schedule feasibility, and budget feasibility for missions. And we've used this quite a large number of times now in recent years. Sure. We've used this quite a large number of times in recent years, ranging from work with the Office of National Intelligence and the intelligence community through to extensive studies with CSIRO, Geoscience Australia, Bureau of Meteorology, and so on. My colleagues in the next few talks are going to tell you a little about some of the research and development we do, particularly in the area of space domain awareness. We're working with the US Air Force researchers in developing a intelligent satellite constellation testbed, and there's interesting things afoot there. And we do a lot of education. There's current education offerings, and there are future education opportunities to support Defence Space Command, in which we take the students, as I mentioned earlier, and immerse them, get their hands dirty. We want to bring together students into a space cohort, mechanicals, electricals, computer scientists, etc., and get them into multidisciplinary teams that design, build and fly CubeSats. So, last very, very quick comments. Defence has a new space strategy. In what ways can UNSW Canberra Space assist that? The last word there in the vision, industry. The university sector is part of industry, and we can play a role there. And we offer a number of opportunities in various objectives that are listed in the space strategy. Particularly the last one there, 5B, helping to develop the future skilled workforce. And with that, I will take any questions. Vince, I think we've got a couple of minutes, haven't we?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much.
So particularly looking at the education pathways that you had on the screens before, specifically the postgraduate programs that you've got for space engineering and space operations. Two-part question. First one is, what kind of background for students would you be expecting to benefit the most from doing those programs? And then what would you then expect them to be doing to contribute to space after being graduates from those programs as well?
So at the moment we have the Master of Space Engineering and Master of Space Ops. They're both online. They're fairly intensive, and you need to have a technical undergraduate qualification to do the Master of Space Engineering, but it will give you a flavour of things like ethics, policy, legal, etc. The Master of Space Ops is designed for the person who does not have a technical background, but rather is likely to be a project manager, an operator, the business types. It focuses more on, it gives a technical flavour, but is focusing more on the whole spectrum. And so with either of those, you could proceed into different areas of the space cadre that Space Command is building. There are more offerings in the pipeline, though, which will put that on steroids, if you like.
Thanks.
Yes, go ahead.
Russ, Brett here, there are, as you know, there's nearly half of Australia's universities are members of SmartSat. Most of them have very little, if no, space capability for whatever reason they've joined CRC. Last week we heard about an organisation coming out of ANU called OSCIF, the Australian Space Industry Forum, I think that's what it stands for, which is meant to bring together all of the universities that are doing research and hoping to do education in space and try to rationalise this. Park that thought. 2 weeks ago, Enrico Palermo in Melbourne made clear that unless Australia starts to understand that its competitors are foreign, we have to compete in a global environment rather than fighting each other university to university, state to state. Come back now to my first point. How the hell are we going to bring together a national approach to education as opposed to the very fragmented and competitive approach, even in this town where you and ANU are cutting each other's throats? It's not going to work.
Thanks, Brett, for the very frank words. I'll address the very last words. There has been interesting embracing, like the French and the British, between ANU and UNSW Canberra over the years, but to be honest, we are actually working very closely together and seeking to do so even more closely. You're dead right. The country needs to be coordinated. And so in the immersive space education multi-year program, which we have proposed to last year to Air Force Headquarters, and it's still sitting with Defence Space Command while the skills gap analysis is being done, we recognised, as did Air Vice Marshal Kath Roberts, that we can't provide enough skilled bodies ourselves. It needs to be a national effort. Defence Space Command needs to get its skilled people from all over the country and from elsewhere as well. So we have to work together. And so part of our offering, if you like, is to assist with the coordination of that, because there are different sets of skills in different universities, and so different parts of the workforce can come from different universities, but it needs some coordination. The OSIF thing, I have very strongly given my own opinion to that collection. It's a wonderful thing to be coordinating and communicating across the university sector in Australia. At the moment, they're seeking to take that one step further and present the United Research Sector voice to government. That's the job of the National Committee for Space and Radio Science as the lead voice. It's part of the Australian Academy of Science. And I think this new consortium of universities, it needs to coordinate in the way that they're proposing, but it needs to put all energy behind the Academy of Science on the science and research perspective on the one hand, and behind the Space Industry Association of Australia on the other hand, and be contributing to the cohesion. It's certainly not creating more, I was going to say disunity, but it's the wrong word, confusion. Thank you.
All right, we've got one question from online. Christopher Horn. In the environment with wind effects, I imagine that this data disappears into the noise. How do you intend to filter your data to achieve your intent of object detection?
When Christopher says environment with wind effects, I'm not completely sure what he's getting at there. But one of the things that we set out to do 7 years ago, 8 years ago, was to get very, very good at understanding the space environment and the way in which space objects interact with that space environment, to be able to understand at a deep physics level and to be able to model and predict it. Slowly over the years, building up capability in that area so that at a certain point in time, we will be able to assist, or now Defence Space Command, in saying, yeah, that thing that we saw happen, that was a natural effect. That thing that we saw happen, that had some human aspect to it. And actually, we predict that human aspect was, that was just a normal housekeeping event for the spacecraft. Well, no, it wasn't. It was a deliberate, possibly nefarious action. We want to be able to get to the point where our understanding of the physics is, and our ability to predict it is that good. Our ability to take the ground-based and space-based observations and combine with the predictions, it's that good that we can say, we can do attribution.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.